Businesses grow by delegation. An agency agreement allows a single entity to multiply their economic reach by authorizing someone else to act on their behalf. But this leverage creates a mathematical problem. By multiplying their reach, the principal simultaneously multiplies their legal exposure. This exposure fractures into two entirely separate legal domains, depending on exactly what the agent does out in the world. The first domain is defensive risk. This occurs when an agent commits a tortious act, a civil wrong causing harm or loss against a third party. This triggers an immediate, expensive question: under what exact conditions is the principal forced to pay for the damage caused by their agent's collision? The second domain is offensive reward. Here, the agent operates exactly as intended, successfully brokering a commercial contract with a third party. This triggers a reciprocal question: when is the agent legally entitled to demand their commission or payment from the principal? You cannot resolve these disputes with basic business intuition. Instead, the law relies on a sequence of 4 specific steps to resolve these disputes. This is a matrix showing the IRAC framework. IRAC stands for Issue, Rule, Application, and Conclusion. Whether analyzing a multi-million-dollar negligence claim or a contested real estate commission, the IRAC framework converts chaotic human interactions into standardized legal findings. Let's apply this process to the first scenario, the defensive tort claim against the principal. We start at the top of the matrix with the issue. We must identify the precise legal question at stake. Here, we ask, is the principal vicariously liable for the agent's tort? Vicarious liability is a legal mechanism that shifts the financial burden of a tort away from the primary actor, the agent, and onto the principal's deeper pockets. To see if that burden shift happens, we move to the rule. The law states the principal is liable if the tort was committed within the scope of employment or within the agent's actual or apparent authority. The first half of this rule applies to standard employees. The scope of employment covers actions the employee is explicitly hired to perform, along with tasks reasonably incidental to those daily duties. The second half applies to empowered agents. Actual authority is explicitly granted by the principal, while apparent authority exists when the principal's own behavior leads a third party to reasonably believe the agent has the power to act. Think of this rule as a strict geometric perimeter. If the agent's tortious act falls a single inch outside these definitions, the principal is shielded from liability entirely. Now we move to the application step, mapping historical data against our established rule. We will look at 2 defining cases: Lloyd versus Grace Smith and Company from 1912 and Century Insurance from 1942. In Century Insurance, a driver transporting petrol lit a cigarette and threw the match on the ground during delivery, causing a massive explosion. The driver was obviously not authorized to cause an explosion. However, the court categorized the negligent act as falling inside the scope of employment because he was executing his authorized task of delivering petrol when the carelessness occurred. The Lloyd case involves an entirely different type of harm. Here, a managing clerk committed an intentional, self-serving property fraud against a client. Even though the agent acted entirely for his own benefit, the principal law firm had vested him with the apparent authority to handle property transfers. That specific decision trapped the principal inside the liability perimeter. This dictates the output of the conclusion block. Because the facts of both cases locked directly into the rule's parameters, the court concluded the principals were vicariously liable for the damages.
Vicarious liability is strictly territorial. A principal cannot disown an agent's disastrous actions simply because they were negligent or fraudulent, so long as those actions occurred within the established radius of authority. We now wipe the slate clean and look at the agent's offensive claim for payment. We start a new IRAC matrix. The issue here asks, does the agent have a right to remuneration? Notice the shift in polarity. Unlike tort liability, where the principal is trying to distance themselves from a destructive outcome, the agent is now actively trying to prove a direct connection to a profitable one. We move to the rule. To earn their fee under standard agency agreements, the agent must prove they were the effective means of bringing the parties together. The legal definition of effective means is exacting. Showing mere effort, total hours spent, or making initial introductions are legally insufficient to guarantee a commission. The law requires the agent to deliver a specific result, a legally binding contract executed between the principal and the third party. The rule for remuneration ignores an agent's sweat equity. It strictly demands proof that the agent was the definitive catalyst for the final binding signature. We step into the application phase to test this rule against historical business disputes, specifically L.J. Hooker and Rasmussen and Russo. Both cases test a specific legal mechanism, the causal chain connecting the agent's initial introduction to the final signed contract. In L.J. Hooker Limited, the court examines this timeline to see if the agent's specific, continuous actions directly resulted in the executed contract without interruption. But the Rasmussen and Russo case demonstrates how fragile this connection can be. Outside interventions, massive delays, or the independent actions of the parties over time can sever the connection entirely.
Once that causal chain snaps, the agent is no longer considered the effective means of the transaction. This dictates the final conditional output populating the conclusion block in our matrix. A right to payment is only finalized when the facts prove an unbroken line of causation from introduction to signature. Liability is about being caught inside a boundary, but remuneration is about building an unbreakable bridge. If the bridge collapses before the contract is signed, the agent walks away with nothing. Placing both completed analyses side by side reveals the structural differences in how the law operates. Look at the geometry of the two rules. The liability test on the left is strictly spatial. As we saw in Lloyd and Century Insurance, for a principal to be liable, the agent must simply be operating inside that spatial radius of authority when the harm occurs. The remuneration test on the right operates on completely different physics. It is linear and causal. As demonstrated by Hooker and Rasmussen, for an agent to be paid, they must forge an unbroken linear chain directly to a binding contract. Understanding these distinct frameworks is a baseline requirement for operating in any commercial environment. Principals must use the liability framework to audit their internal policies, intentionally restricting apparent authority to limit their financial exposure. Conversely, agents must use the remuneration framework to meticulously document their causal impact on every transaction, ensuring their commissions are protected from dispute. The IRAC process removes emotional or intuitive judgments from complex commercial disputes. Courts rely on this four-step model to allocate the significant economic risks and rewards inherent in every principal-agent relationship.